This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. I'm on the line with Christian DeBenedetti of Wolves and People Brewery out in Newberg, Oregon. Welcome to the podcast, Christian.
Thanks for having me.
We are in another remote edition of the podcast, and Christian is someone I've known for a very long time now, I guess 11 years, and actually predating the world of beer. I first entered Christian's world back in 2009 when he was writing a story on helmet camming for the New York Times style section. And I was the president of the New York City Mountain Bike Association, was pretty active helmet camera, like filming with video cameras strapped to the side of my bike helmet at the time to try to get footage. And you reached out to me and wanted me to test some helmet cams. And it ended up being a half-page, full-color story on the back of the New York Times Sunday Style section, and it was awesome.
So much fun. So much fun. I ended up getting to test one of those units as well, and I'm not that radical of a mountain biker, although I'd like to think so sometimes. And cruising through Prospect Park in Brooklyn in the deep trails, and then going back and looking at the footage, I was like, yeah, I can see why people get addicted to this. It's a lot of fun.
It was. And so, it's funny that, how small this world is. Here we are today, Beer Magazine, Brewery. You've moved from a world of journalism to a world of brewing and throwing your hat in the ring and are making things now out from a family farm in Newberg, Oregon. I cannot wait to talk to Christian. He's got a fantastic story about culturing yeast, brewing with their cultured yeast, making farmhouse beers on an actual farm, using yeast that they've cultured from various areas of the brewery. He's working on a state malting program to actually grow barley on the farm or adjacent to the farm. We're going to talk about that. It's a cool story about farmhouse brewing, and I can't wait to get into more. But first, nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Innovative modular designs and no proprietary parts propel G&D ahead as the premier choice for your glycol chilling needs. Breweries you recognize like Russian River, Ninkasi, Jack's Abbey, Samuel Adams, and more. Trust G&D to chill the beer you love. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is brought to you by RAR North Star Pils, a new base malt to set your compass by. RAR North Star Pils is crafted for brewers looking for a domestic Pilsner malt with low color and low modification. North Star Pils carries overtones of honey and sweet bread, supported by flavors and aromas of hay and nutty character. Suitable for any beer style, but particularly craft brewed versions of classic lagers. Let RAR North Star Pils guide your craft by visiting bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact them at 1-800-374-2739. So, Christian, obviously I mentioned a little bit about your journalism background and how, that was how we met. Talk to me a little bit about how that journalism career brought you into this kind of sphere of craft beer, and then how you made that leap into, from writing about beer into making beer and running a brewery.
Wow. It goes back about 10 years to around the time we met. I'd been living in New York City for 9 years, working as a freelance writer, doing a lot of travel stories, and beer had become, my specialty and my passion. I'd been writing about beer and thinking about beer, since my freshman year in college when I started homebrewing. Not very serious home brewer ever, but I loved it so much, and I made it kind of my personal mission to get magazines in New York where I was writing about travel and food and drink to cover beer as well. And so, fortunately, I got a few past the censors, and it grew into a thing where, as a very, very junior staffer on some large magazines, I was able to kind of like take the reins on these big beer writing projects, and it was incredibly exciting, and fortunately just really dovetailed with a lot of exciting things going on in the beer world. So flash forward to the end of 2008 and 9, full crash of the print media as we know it, massive seismic changes in media. And 5 of the magazines I worked for as a freelancer, supporting myself as a writer, went out of business in a 6-month period, including all the ones I wrote about beer for. And I realized I needed to make a change. And I wanted to come home anyway. I've been dreaming about doing a brewery on the family farm, for as long as I could legally drink beer and homebrew. And I wanted to get back to that. But, it seemed kind of impossible, and I was too far away. So moving home, the short version is soon after I moved back to the West Coast, within a month or two, I got the opportunity to go out again on the road and do a travel book. So that became my first really large writing project, which was called The Great American Ale Trail. And I sold the book to National Geographic and went out on the road for about a year and a half, visiting breweries and basically immersing myself in what in 2010 and 2009, 10, and early 11 was just an explosion of incredible growth around the country of breweries. We've seen that in the last few years here, of course, too. But if you can think back to that era when, what was going on nationally, it wasn't really happening in the Northeast yet, where I'd been living. And I was always nostalgic about, got to get back to Oregon and the beer scene. So great there. But suddenly this thing is flowering, and hundreds of breweries opening, probably a month even in certain areas. It was just amazing. So I got out on the road. And
when 600 breweries open in a year, when you only have 1,800 breweries in the country, then, it just feels like this massive thing.
It was crazy. I mean, and for me, the tipping point was going to the GABF for the first time. I got to go out for a magazine. I remember standing, in the middle of the hall under Michael Jackson's, black and white portrait, looking around, seeing the thousands of people, seeing all the Oregon brewers that I knew having the time of their lives, seeing huge lines at all these other breweries. And I just realized that, I wasn't going to let another, year pass by without really changing my life to pursue making beer, pursue the dream of doing the brewery on the farm, and leaving New York. That was the moment I decided to leave New York and change my whole career, which I've been working on for almost 10 years. And it really suddenly felt very freeing and exciting. And just seeing the energy level that people had, it was so incredible. So I went home and started packing up my stuff, and that was in, September or late September. By the end of the year, I was out and had moved back home. So anyway, the transition got me back out on the road to write the book. And during that time, I realized that it was both a great opportunity to do a good job on the book, hopefully an important time in the beer industry, but also to kind of use it as my personal graduate school to, interview brewers at length about, the question I would always ask was, what is the hardest thing that you faced in building a brewery? What was the biggest challenge? What are the roadblocks? Because I personally felt super intimidated by the level of brewing going on everywhere. It had eclipsed what I came up around in college by so far, and there were breweries growing so quickly. So it was wonderful. I made a lot of friends out on the road, and I learned so much, and I got to taste so many great beers. It was a very difficult project to complete on the deadline that I had, but it was 500 destinations, and I had about 9 months to do it. And of course, I couldn't go to every single one, but long phone interviews, and I got to about 30 states, and just burned myself out completely to get that thing done. I remember. You'll appreciate this as a journalist. The glorious moment of turning in the book was at about 5 a.m. on a rainy Portland morning in May, drinking IPA out of a coffee cup on the street. And I'd started smoking again to just get some extra energy, which I thankfully haven't touched in many years. But, this was the glorious moment of it. Bang, I just hit send and turned in this 500-page book, and it was like I might as well have been, very, very far away. It was a pretty pretty inglorious moment. But anyway, that got me out on the road and into the community. I learned a lot, and it was just inspiring. So I had the chance to, once that was done, think a lot more seriously about what it was going to take and be based in Oregon. And then around 2013, started renting the space that the brewery is now in. And it wasn't until 2014 that there was gear in here. A lot of things happened in between, of course. Yeah, it was a wonderful period of information gathering and making friends and contacts, going to amazing festivals where I would meet a lot of people that I would end up working with. So yeah, it was very, very lucky time.
And now, your family had this farm out in Oregon, and that's where you've landed with this brewery. Talk to me a little bit about that plan, because popping a brewery out in the middle of agricultural country, mixed on a nut farm with, wineries around you, that's also, its own strategy, and not necessarily, you're not necessarily putting a brewery in a town or in a city of, a place like Portland, where the people are. You are building some sort of destination that's rooted in some other idea. Talk to me a little bit about how you came to the idea of building a brewery in that kind of form, and some of the thought behind that.
Yeah, growing up here, it's a beautiful farm about 21 miles from Portland, southwest of Portland. We grew up farming hazelnuts, or as we call them in Oregon, filberts. And my parents were in the kind of in the food world. I guess my late father was a meat packer, and his father was in meat packing, and so there's a lot of focus on food and drink growing up. Later, my mom and stepdad ran a bed and breakfast out of the farm, and they were very much part of the growth of this kind of the wine scene in Oregon. My mother moved to the Yamhill County, Willamette Valley area where we are, the heart of Oregon's wine country, in 1967, which was just a few months after David Lett got here. My mother is also from Napa. And so there were this kind of exodus of people coming out of California. Well, it's hard to call it an exodus. A few people moving into Oregon to,
right.
Pursue a new kind of life in Oregon that hadn't really been tried out yet. So she came up with a lot of these young winemakers and helped plant vineyards and so forth. I grew up with all this lore and saw the wineries being built, including right next to our farm. Rex Hill and A to Z Wineworks is adjacent to our farm, and they started as a little mom and pop, and now are a national, a 50-state winery brand. So really incredible to see that. And I ended up working in a lot of these wineries during and after college for a while. So I think that the big aha moment for me came after college, where, like I said, I'd done some really amateurish homebrewing, but I won a grant to go overseas for a year on this thing called the Thomas J. Watson Fellowship. And I think I've, probably bored you to tears about this before, but I was so lucky to get this. It changed my life incredibly. It was a grant given to 60 people a year, still is awarded each year, and you can study any passion, any topic that you can convince this board in letting you study. So I submitted a proposal to study breweries in Belgium and across Europe and in West Africa to learn about the roots and traditions of brewing techniques around the world. So to my amazement, right, a few months before graduation, I won this grant, and I had a plan. So when I landed in Belgium, I was 22, and I had been given a list of contacts by Charlie Papazian, who I cold called on the phone. And I had his book, and I was I called information. You used to call 555-1212, right? So I called I called Charlie in Boulder and got him on the phone, and I was like, so I won this grant. I have no idea. I'm scared. What am I going to do? I have to go to Europe for a year. I get to go to Europe for a year. It's incredible. What should I do? Who should I call? And he faxed me a list of phone numbers and emails, and the first name on the list was Michael Jackson's. And then it went on down, and it was just this incredible, adventure that unfolded. And I could go on way too long about that year and what it meant for me personally, but it was amazing, and it changed my entire life. But when I got to Belgium and I set foot in some farmhouse breweries, and lambic breweries is when I knew I finally realized if I was ever going to build a brewery, it would be on our own farm at home. I had imagined a much more modern industrial kind of thing. But then when I set foot in these old 18th and 19th century barn breweries, particularly in Brussels in that area, I realized that we could do it in our barn, which has been here since 1912, and we grew up processing filberts in, and it was empty at that time. So that's where the dream came alive, and it seemed real to me. It seemed attainable. Whereas before, I didn't really realize how can we ever do this on the farm? It's so far away from people. But when you get to some of the rural and countryside breweries in Belgium, you see that it's a beautiful tradition. So, in my own small way, and without much knowledge at all at the time, I really wanted to bring that back here.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how you decided to, about beers you're going to build and how to focus your kind of brewing energy. Before we do that, this episode is brought to you by Mountain Rose Herbs, purveyors of the highest quality organic herbs, spices, and teas. Whether you want to add depth to your next golden triple with classic notes of cinnamon, pepper, and clove, or artfully layer exotic, zesty grains of paradise into a perfect ale, adding botanicals to your brewing is an easy way to customize a delicious flavor profile. Mountain Rose Herbs has been providing organic herbs and spices to chefs, herbalists, and dedicated brewers for more than 3 decades. Learn more at mountainroseherbs.com and get 10% off your first order with the code CRAFTBEER10. Also, Grandstand is your source for the latest trends in branded drinkware, apparel, and promotional items. We make your job easy by serving as your one-stop shop for everything you need to outfit your taproom and fans. Current trends include to-go drinkware, tie-dyed prints, and portable coolers. Visit egrandstand.com/lookbook to see what's trending. So, Kristen, you had this idea you're going to start a farmhouse brewery on your farm, inspired by these Belgian greats. How did you move from that kind of conceptual framework for a brewery into beers in the tank, mash in the mash tun, wort into fermenters, and then making some beer? And how did you kind of come from narrow down this gigantic broad range of possibility, and not just immediately, but over the last few years? How have you continued to kind of work through that process to build this family of beer that Wolves and People is known for now?
Well, very, very, very slowly, and making a lot of mistakes along the way. But
yeah,
no, seriously, I mean, inspired by those beers, I would say I think I saw the potential to do a brewery that was kind of like a destination out in the wine country, because there were so many wineries drawing people, first of all. And no one's drinking much farmhouse beer in the last, 30 years in Oregon until, I would say, Upright and, Logston and some of the really path-breaking, excellent breweries in the area, Block 15, started like, bringing the excellent, Belgian pale ales, saisons, grisettes into the lexicon in Oregon. That was so inspiring. And I did go and visit Dave Logston at his operation. Among all the other breweries I got to visit while working on the book, I went there, and shortly after it opened, and just plugged his brain, and I fell so in love with the beers they were doing early on. And really, so I've just been so fortunate to have, I'm a really curious person. I love talking with other brewers, and using the kind of beginner's mind approach to just plug people for advice and inspiration, and really lean on people in the industry to learn from. I was not a professional brewer. Sometimes I still wonder if I am. There's a lot.
Sure.
I mean, let's face it. We all got to keep learning in everything that we do, and it's not a good day for me if I haven't pushed myself to learn something more in the cellar. So I think a natural, kind of interrogator of assumptions and techniques, and I just love nerding out and talking to brewers who want to share. Unfortunately, people really opened up their worlds to me, very graciously sharing every detail you could possibly want to ask, across the brewing industry. So that was amazing, and it was such a, like I said, a very hopeful, happy time to be out there talking with brewers and having everyone be so encouraging. Be like,
Right.
hey, that's cool. You're doing this writing project. Good for you. And also, if you want to do your own brewery, I hope that works out for you. And not like, hey, man, stay in your lane. Like people were so supportive of that. So, I would say, the Saison tradition, such as it is, it's very hard to put your finger on even what that is. And there's so much interesting and invigorating kind of debate on the meaning of farmhouse ale and going on right now. Whether or not it, without going off into a tangent, it's just a very, very fertile topic right now. And but also as a beer style or a set of styles, a group of styles, and an amazingly wide canvas on which to bring some creativity and some experimentation. And that's what struck me as I traveled around the world, going from the smallest, little startup project like back in 2010, visiting Hill Farmstead when it just opened or just about to open, and then going to New Belgium, a couple months later and seeing, acres of fooders, seeing all the possibilities.
Sure. Sure.
And trying to be open to that. So for us, it has been a really winding road, and I've been really, really fortunate to work with outstanding coworkers, and brewers here to help me learn and take me on this journey, and get to where we are today together. So it's been an amazing process.
You briefly mentioned this debate over farmhouse, and the term. Obviously, some folks get caught up in semantics, and words have meaning. There are a number of breweries that choose not to use the name farmhouse for their beers just because they're in a brewery in a kind of industrial facility, and it's just doesn't feel farmhousey. Others, other folks approach it from, this is the style, and we were going to name it after a style because that is what people are familiar with, and the flavor commonality of that is in line with what people expect. Styles have names. Just because you're making a Goza doesn't mean you're in Leipzig. From your perspective, how do you approach that kind of thinking, and what's your philosophy around that?
Oh man, that's such a hard question to ask. I come at it from kind of two sides. One, Michael Jackson was my hero, and I was so lucky to get to know him and spend time with him. And I think many brewers would agree he's sort of responsible for the modern understanding of beer styles in a way. Like a lot of people, no one was really talking globally about beer styles in the way we do today before the New World Guide to Beer. So I had this dog-eared copy, and I studied it, and it was like my Bible. I carried it around in my backpack for a year, and coming out of that approach where there is a sort of, delineated tradition among certain styles, and then blossoming into the American craft scene where styles are migrating, brewers are experimenting, yeast strains are swapping, beers are entering this wild, like jazz age almost of experimentation. Those are not irreconcilable sides, but as a brewer, we do struggle with communicating, well, what is this beer? What is this style? Does it have the three letters that 99% of people want to hear? IPA.
Right.
Yeah, all day. We didn't brew one for the first 2 years here, actually, and we're really proud of them now. But we were kind of holding out to push forward grisettes and and saisons and beer de coupage and a lot of different styles. I think it's useful to advance the beer communication and the understanding of beer into the world, corners of the food and drink world that are maybe not as familiar as us brewers are, and the way we talk about it. I think it can be helpful, but I also think it can be unnecessarily limiting, to kind of like go back and study the BJCP guidelines and think, well, this isn't really a grisette because X. Well, there's a lot of interpretation and a lot of interesting debates going on about what are these things. So I don't come down on any hard-edged side of it either way. I think, like I said, saison farmhouse ale is a beautiful approach to beer making. It's kind of a style of beer making rather than a set of flavors that should or should not be in the glass for someone. And I think it's really beautiful when it opens someone's mind when they taste 5 different kinds of saisons and they realize like so much possibility in that. They can be dry, they can be luscious and tropical, they can be sour, they can be gin barrel aged, they can be, black as night. There's so many cool things you can do with saisons and farmhouse ales that really, I think, is an invitation to exploration and not a hard and fast kind of approach to beer making that would exclude or hold up exploration.
Yeah, I mean, historically, all of these terms, styles, etc. I mean, style is just marketing, and the styles as we've delineated them are generally descriptive more than prescriptive. That they are, the guidelines that have been handed down or codified in things like BJCP or Great American Beer Festival Style Guide are,
and they're important. Those are good things.
Yeah,
but
they are describing what commercial brewers are making, and they shouldn't ever be seen as the things that limit the creativity of those brewers. They are simply means of aggregating groups of things the brewers make so that like things can be judged. They are not a recipe for the only things that brewers should make.
Right.
Styles will continue to evolve and new styles will appear. And, in fact, you can see just how dynamic even the idea of styles are today, and that, how many new styles appear in any given year. And so that creativity and not losing sight of what flavors are possible, becomes the thing that you do. And the important thing that commercial brewers bring to the world. And the styles will follow that. Let's talk a little bit about your process of making, these farmhouse beers, these grisettes, these saisons. And talk to me a little bit about, your initial yeast explorations. That played a big part in your identity for the brewery, building, yeast profiles. When I was out there a number of years ago, I guess, was it 2017 or so, it was about a year after you opened. I remember seeing just carboy after carboy after carboy with, with little yeasts, projects, bubbling up in there. And, so that has been a big part of how you define the brewery, by those farmhouse yeasts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so starting out, one of the things that I wanted to do before the brewery was even born was, really tie this brewery to this site. And, insofar as I could make a brewery on this land, on this specific place in the world, reflect itself in the glass, was the mission. Because this is what this is, like I said, some of the beers in the Seine Valley in Belgium, and the most exciting and notable projects seem to grow out in a way out of the ground that they were literally in. And is that possible? And I think today that's a concept people are much more comfortable talking about or more loose with. But when I started talking about it, at least among the people I was meeting, it was pretty unusual concept. The idea of growing your own yeast from your own fruits on the farm, or that wasn't certainly very widely practiced because it's so difficult. It's very accidental. There's a lot of false and not kind of like wrong paths you're going to go down. So anyway, but I had this kind of half-baked idea that we were going to grow wild yeast off of the plum tree in our meadow, and that became the first project really at the brewery. Once the brewery was set up, which took about a year, and it was a total ordeal to get the barn ready and work with our first head brewer to build out the brewery and set it up, and then working through the winters, the two of us, it was Jordan Keeper, who is now heading up the barrel program at Brussels Beer Project. Great guy. And we went out and, propped some yeast from a tree in the meadow and got a promising, nice, couple of homebrewed saisons off on it. And started out with that. The very first batch we brewed on the system was fermented with that beer, but frankly, it stalled out. It's very cold at that time of year when we brewed this beer in the fall, and after plum season, and what seemed like a really great idea was suddenly kind of like stalled in the tank. And I think a lot of people who have tried to propagate wild yeast from fruit have run into this problem, or off flavors, or a yeast that never flocks out, or who knows? There's a lot of strange things that can happen. And I'm not running a scientific lab in here at the time. These were just very rudimentary, stir plate and some wort and some plums down in the jar, basically. But it smelled wonderful. It seemed to have a lot of potential, and so we banked it down in California at White Labs, and then quickly though moved into mixed fermentations, because it was like, look, this is not going to carry the brewery. It seemed like this kind of like a Hail Mary pass to be like, our first wild yeast, it's not going to be the DuPont strain, right? It smelled awesome. But what we didn't know at the time, which I want to get to in a second, is what that yeast was probably lacking was just a much warmer environment and better temperature control. So fast forward, 5 years later, we've done a lot of wild yeast props, from the plums on the property to fir tips to rose hips to fully wild and spawn projects. All kinds of different things. Kind of find the different parts of the farm that might be producing a really healthful microflora for doing fermentation. So a couple of years ago, I was in Austin at the Honey Board has a summit every year that brewers get invited to go on sometime. I was really lucky to be part of it. I met Evan Watson from Plan B Brewery in New York. He gave this talk, which just like totally blew my mind, which was that he had set up beehives on his farm up outside of up in the Hudson Valley, and wanted to capture wild yeast from the bees, from the bodies of the bees, because they're only pollinating and going around to the most healthy flowers and fruits and so forth, and not like landing in roadkill like a wasp would or something. So, or yellow jacket. So he gave this. First of all, we're drinking these beers, and they're just incredibly tasting beers. They're so good, and he gives a really colorful presentation as well. And he had managed to create an entire yeast program off of wild yeast captured from bees and honeycomb and wax from the hive. So in that moment, I just realized I became friends with him over that weekend and stayed in touch and got some advice. And I went out, and that March went out and set up 4 hives on the farm with the intention of later getting, hopefully harvesting some very healthy yeast out of those hives. So that's where we are today. Just to jump way forward, about 2 years ago, I pulled various samples of comb and wax and honey out of the hives in the early and late part of the season, and prop those up with wort on a stir plate. Very, very simple, like I said, pretty unscientific, although, it was as sterile as possible, bringing down a sterilized flask and so forth, and dropping the sample right in, sealing it up, rushing it up to the brewery, and letting it rip. And unlike the plums, the beehive yeast seemed to be a lot more sort of even and vigorous, and continuing to produce beautiful aroma. So this is where, after we had several of these going that were all just smelling great, but all slightly unique, I contacted Nick Impellitteri of the Yeast Bay, who has just relocated to the Portland area from Oakland and Berkeley. And the Yeast Bay, if anyone doesn't know about that, is an amazing project. He's kind of a yeast wrangler who sells home brewing strains and commercial strains based on blends and props that he goes out and creates. And the Yeast Bay it had been supplying us with some very beautiful, Belgian Saison strains, Wallonian strains, Brett blends. And Nick and I had gotten to know each other and really enjoyed hanging out, talking beer. And he'd been out to the brewery a bunch of times. And so we started kicking around this idea, like, what, could he help on this beehive project? And I told him about Evan and at Plan B. And so he got involved, and this is where things really got amazing and interesting. He took those samples back to his lab and propagated them all out, isolated 6 different unique, 6 isolates from the various combinations we provided him. And then we brought those, and he brewed 6 little mini batches of beer, brought them back to us for a blending and tasting session. And the first batch of a beer we now call Wild Queen was born. We found a nice blend, and he learned a lot about this yeast in that process, and had the DNA analyzed, and we learned that it was a wild strain of Saccharomyces called Saccharomyces variation Boulardii, which is a kind of a probiotic strain of wild yeast that tends to live on the skins of wine grapes. So no surprises that the winery is on two sides of the brewery, so a huge vineyard. So our bees were heading up the hill, hanging out on some Oregon Pinot Noir and various grapes and coming back to the hive. So he learned too in his experiments that it really wanted to ferment really high, 75 to 80 degrees. And he was getting 90%, 89 to 90% efficiency, on those fermentations. So the most recent, and sorry, I'm going on too long about this, but the most recent one, we narrowed in on one particular isolate that seemed to be the most promising and propped that up. And he recently released that as a beta strain for home brewers available through the Yeast Bay. And those they're gone now, but he's going to prop it up again, he says, and put them out there. And the aroma on this was so exciting because the promise of a yeast that comes from this exact piece of ground was kind of realized. And I've got it in tank right now. I wish we had like smell-o-vision. You could stick your nose in this tank because it smells like guava and mango and banana and lime peel, and it has this crazy tropical thing going on. And yeah, so I'm very excited about that.
I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the variations on those. For people that may be trying to culture their own yeast at home, if you're talking about 6 different isolates here, trying to figure out how you decide which ones to kind of move forward with. Before we do that, Abe Beverage Equipment is your trusted source for complete brewing and packaging solutions. Whether you're just starting out or looking to expand, Abe offers brew houses from 3 to 60 barrels and canning lines from 15 to 90 cans per minute. Call Abe Beverage Equipment at 402-475-BEER or visit abeequipment.com to learn more. Located in Lincoln, Nebraska, Abe is your trusted source for your brewery equipment. Visit abeequipment.com for complete brewery solutions. So as you taste through these, I love to get into the minds of brewers as we try to connect the language that brewers use to make judgments about things with their taste buds themselves, because that's just one of those kind of fundamental developmental skills that is hard to learn, and that people, so as we delve into that, like as you're tasting the differences between some of these, these different yeasts that are part of these, varying cultures that you've pulled out of your hives, how would you describe the differences between those, and how did you make decisions as to what you liked and didn't like?
Yeah, interesting. The fermentations were all very sort of constant, all at a certain temperature, the same grain bill. And the isolates then presented themselves in a more distinct way, by all things being equal, right? I think, the nose knows there's so much that jumps out of a sample or a glass of beer, or, a yeast sample or anything that you're trying, that, it's kind of like tickles the brain almost. It reaches places that you're not expecting sometimes. And I think there's a certain harmony that you're looking for between spice and floral notes, between, certainly how much, are there volatile, esters or ethanol type, aromas that might seem harsh. And so we're looking for the, that kind of pleasing overall. And frankly, I think a fruitiness and saisons and farmhouse ales is often desired and helps kind of waft the complexities of whatever mixed grain bill you might have used. Certainly a nice component of farmhouse ales is, big esters, So I think we're looking for that potential. and also maybe a certain kind of X factor that seems a little bit maybe unusual. A lot of these samples smelled very similar, but one in particular just jumped out, and it's hard to exactly know why. Like I said, this was a semi-scientific process, hardly on our end of things where I'm out there just sticking a jar in the hive basically. But when Nick got involved, it got a lot more detailed, and it's just been a wonderful process. But I think for anyone who wants to try this out, we would be so psyched for people to go to the Yeast Bay and order some of this yeast, which we decided to call Forager, for the bees, which are out foraging. And I've learned a lot about beekeeping. It's been really fun. I set up the hives the same month that my son was born. And so we had a baby and 10,000 young bees on the farm at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't recommend that in the future to anyone who wants to get hives. It's a lot of work, but it's a really magical element to have, even if you just have a little backyard. Bees are really, really amazing animals.
What kind of recipe do you use when you're kind of testing doing these yeast experiments? Are there some certain elements of recipes that you find help tease out the characteristics of these better than other characteristics?
Yeah, I mean, just like with beer, we always start with a really fresh malt, something kind of a little more neutral. A pale Pilsner malt, something that not lacking for quality, but giving you a nice palate or kind of a baseline to detect aromas, and then throwing in some oats, throwing in some rye, throwing some other specialty grain, for example, to just kind of give the yeast different things to chew on, see how they behave with some different kinds of food, essentially. There's so many different ways, obviously,
Sure.
You can go with it. And then on the bitterness side, I think, everyone has their own theories on it, but, we wouldn't go much below 25, 26 IBUs just to, retard any unwanted bacterias. And give the yeast a chance.
And who would want a yeast that can't handle that kind of IBU anyway? So
yeah, right, exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about how you have kind of taken these kind of wild isolate yeast and developed a family of farmhouse beers out using them. Talk to me a little bit about how now, having set how this yeast behaves, how have you been able to kind of manipulate that, into different styles of beer? Well, not different styles, but at least different expressions within this broader kind of farmhouse ale family.
Well, the first yeast that we called Sebastian,
Right.
That was the plum yeast, ended up going into like 3/4 of our barrels, and there's still barrels that we're actually tasting. This week we pulled barrels out that have been buried in the back of the cellar with batch one. Somehow we never used one of those barrels, and tasting those beers, it's been so interesting to go back and see long term how some of those have formed and come along. And some of the beers are outstanding, and some are goners. But the second thing that we did after the Sebastian strain was create a mixed culture for sour beer. We call that Amigos. Amigos is still throughout many of the barrels in our cellar. That strain has really, evolved over time. It was basically dregs from about 6 of the great sour beer breweries in the world, and evolving in oak over time. So a lot of our beers, like Sebastian Cherry, Pesca, beers that very limited number of which we've been able to put out, just being such a small brewery. But if people have tasted those, it's a nice culture with a mix of sourness, sometimes edging with a hint of acetic acid on it's a grabby, like it really, but in a pleasant way, a way we find really compelling. That continues. And there is a third kind of group that we went into with our puncheons. We have a bunch of white wine puncheons and have a lacto and lacto-pedio combo, and that has been it's kind of difficult to handle sometimes, but that kind of magic, elusive, Russian River ideal of Brett, PDO, and lacto acting in total harmony. But that group of yeasts lives on in barrels, and we're kind of currently now steering that more towards a classic saison Brett profile. Eliminating PDO. Although one of our favorite beers that we have on draft right now and in bottle we're about to release, it went through a massive PDO stage, almost 8 months to clean up. But the beer, frankly, it's one of the tastiest beers we've ever been able to put together, and it was so frustrating at the time. But it's kind of like we invited that into our brew house, and we've been wrestling with it sometimes, but sometimes it's worth the risk. Other times not. But so
this is the ropey phase of PDO that's really causing you some issues.
Exactly. Yeah.
Have you found any ways to kind of mitigate that, or push it along, or
kill it with fire?
Encourage it to do the next thing.
That's a whole side thing. We're still evolving in that way. We're about to invest in a steam cleaner though, just for the foeder that's sitting behind me here in the brewery today. We just got a very large foeder for this new program, the Wild Queen program we're talking about, and the forager yeast. So jumping forward, to the forager, the beehive strain, it's been very new. We really did one beer with Wild Queen or with forager, and it was well received. We gave this new beer, the one in tank right now, a much different grain bill, much higher firm temps, and a whole different kind of approach. So it's really, the story is kind of being written right now on that one. We're very excited about what we're detecting in the tank right now. It has almost like some Kvike strains have that kind of like crazy tropical smell. Also, one of my favorite breweries in the world is Fantôme in Belgium, and I learned that there's been some studies on his family of yeasts, and we learned that one component of one of the yeast studied at Fantôme is Saccharomyces boulardii. I haven't seen it in any other kinds of brewing studies or anywhere else in the world being used. So we were really excited when we saw that that might be one of the elements contributing to the flavor. Far be it from me to say I really know anything about the magic that goes on in that brewery, but that's something we read, and it seems to be a connection, and maybe Boulardii is that kind of sensory bridge there to these kind of like ripe Sauvignon Blanc, winey kind of aromas that I've certainly enjoyed in some Fantôme beers. So, there's so many differences between the kind of beer they're making and doing, and what we aspire to do. But he's always been an inspiration. I think many brewers share that sentiment. So that's maybe the Boulardii connection, and that's what we're going to keep learning about as we go on, and we see how this yeast evolves in our environment, because it will.
Do you have any other yeast kind of experiments or areas that you're pushing into to kind of try, test, and see what else you can come up with?
How many times can we reharvest some beautiful Augustiner? No, now we have there's a bunch of things back in the cellar that we're kind of playing around with, and we're going to keep trying things from the farm as time allows. One of the members of my team has brewed some beautiful beers. Kevin manages our tap room, has brewed some beautiful beers with rye, rye berries, basically raw, thrown into some wort, and he did some very nice Goza style beers. So basically a straight lacto fermentation coming off the husks of the grain. So as we move towards this really exciting phase here of growing our own barley, we'll certainly hope to begin fermentations with straight barley, and creating some lactic culture off the husks of those those grains that we grow
See,
here.
I don't even need to host this podcast because you just created the perfect segue for me. It's like you're a professional at this or something. But that was my next question.
It's the beer. It's the beer
There
talking.
you go. Let's pivot a bit and talk a little bit about this estate barley program. Obviously you are very engaged with creating elements for your beers on the farm, the same farm that you're brewing the beers on. Growing barley at a small scale and on several acres, is kind of a tall order. And then figuring out how to malt, obviously, agricultural crops like barley generally benefit from scale, and certainly in order to malt barley, you need equipment that is not necessarily inexpensive, more space, and for several acres of it, I mean, there's just no cost-effective way for anyone to try to do that. So talk to me a little bit as you envision this idea of creating your own barley and estate barley. It does seem like a crazy idea, if I'm just being perfectly honest.
I was just going to say,
seems a little insane.
You've described my insanity perfectly.
But talk to me a little bit about some of those parameters around it and how you're trying to first why you would even bother doing it, and then some of the problems that you've solved along the way to kind of and what the program as a whole looks like.
It is daunting, man. It is. There's no question. Going back to the beginning, when I thought about this brewery, I wanted to name it after the farm that we're on. It's called Springbrook, and at some point, began to realize that maybe the land here could support grass seeds. And when I was growing up, 65 acres of hazelnuts, but they began to die out over the years. It's a long story, but we started to kind of imagine a different use for the farm or different things that would grow. And so there's really no barley farming for brewing barley here in the Willamette Valley anymore. There used to be, but recently some projects have popped up. And then, of course, the amazing craft malting scene that's going on in Oregon and around the country is just, if you're not paying attention to this, people are really missing out, I think, on some really ambitious and beautiful projects going on. So I started to spend time getting to know some of the craft maltsters of the Northwest, like Skagit and Mecca Grade, and the guys at Link and Mainstem, and trying out some beers. And what had once seemed like a pretty much impossible idea started to sound a little more likely. I remember this one day we were talking about planting some barley here, and an old timer in the area came into the brewery with his daughter, had heard about it, and he had been a barley farmer in the Willamette Valley until sometime just shortly after World War II, and an arsonist or a firebug had burnt down his maltings or whatever. But he was like, "Yeah, bring it back, man!" And I was like, "Wow, it's been 50 years since, or 70 years or something since anyone's done anything in the Willamette Valley." And then Gail Goshi out at Goshi Farms, which is a very well known.
Sure.
Beautiful farm. Yes, she planted some wint malt and malting it up in Washington, and it started to sort of seem like there was a possibility for Willamette Valley malt to make a showing. And so if you have other people you can call and kind of talk to and kick the idea around with, it starts to feel a little more attainable, because well beyond our expertise, we're not barley farmers, we have no idea what we're doing at first, but we've been able to connect with some very passionate local farmers and come up with a plan. And so for us, the next step was securing some ground, and we leased 5.5 acres from the winery next door, Rex Hill A to Z Wineworks, and they agreed they'd love to see us using it. It's not good grape land for them at this stage anyway. They don't foresee using it, and it's right adjacent to the brewery. So without having to take out any hazelnuts, which we use in several beers year round, we were able to get a farming plan in place. So hooking up with a local farmer and a baker. Actually, they have a project called Chattanooga Farms. And so we had to come up with a plan. everything from soil prep on forward. So just like we went out and tested the well water, was one of the first things I did back in 2013. Like, hey, how's our well water? Is it going to be good for beer making? Yeah, we went out and checked our soil, had some soil testing, and found that we're going to have a very favorable conditions for growing barley here, hopefully. But of course, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong, from weather to excessive rains, resulting in disease and rust and other things that happen in barley. So really the first plantings will happen this fall and early spring, most likely aiming for a full planting in spring. And then the malting part gets more interesting.
So
after that,
before we talk about the malting, let's talk in terms of barley varieties. How'd you go through a process of finding a variety that might flourish in that kind of Willamette Valley environment?
Yeah, so I reached out to Gail Goshi first and visited her property where she had this really beautiful plot, and she encouraged me to get in touch with a guy at Oregon State University named Pat Hayes. Yeah, Barley World. He runs the barley breeding program. He came out and visited, and I spent time with him, talking over all the various varieties and approaches we could take towards soil prep and having a hopefully successful first harvest. So he's been recommending varieties. We're looking at everything from Full Pint, which is a variety that Oregon State developed, to Thunder and Lightning, which I think it's Thunder, maybe that was planted successfully in a test plot out here. And really we're just going to see what we can get seed-wise, what's available, go with a good spring variety, and go from there. But they have an amazing program down there,
and
a lot of attached research going on. So this will be a collaboration between Oregon State and Wolves and People as well, to bring students out to see what we're doing and see how the variety that we end up planting does in our conditions, and what kind of soil amendments we have to do. It's been used as pumice ground for the last 5 years. So pumice from a winery next door has acidified the soil somewhat, as you might expect. So grape skins and stems have been spread on that plot for 5 straight years. So we're going to have to use natural lime to bring the pH back into favorable range. But anyway, it's really been a cool kind of process of learning and talking to experts who have great advice for us. And in the end, this is a family farmer who grew up out here as well, and his family's been farming out here since the wagon train days, and they're going to drive their equipment down here from pretty far away to help us get this disked and planted and then later harvested.
So 5.5 acres of barley. What does that yield in terms of pounds of barley? Even like post malting.
Well, good question. It depends on how you approach farming. So if you're going a more conventional farming route, with pest control, herbicides and things like that, conventional barley can yield up to, I think, about 5 tons per acre.
Okay.
Before cleaning, drying, and malting. And then if you go the full organic route, which is a whole different ball of wax, then you're looking at yields of more like 2 tons per acre. We are going to chart a middle ground, most likely. We want to adhere to what are called salmon safe standards. Springbrook Creek runs through our land. It's a protected waterway, and we're already doing a lot to be very careful about how we take care of this site here. But salmon safe protocols it's an Oregon thing that is a kind of a pledge to avoid certain harsh herbicides, fungicides, different treatments that you may need to use in order to really keep the topsoil extra healthy. So farmers are totally on board with that, and the winery's glad that we're going to take that route too. So we should see off of 5 acres somewhere between 10 and 20 tons of grain. Wash it, take it out to the malting process. So we're we're looking at doing that with Seth Klon at Mechagrade, and he's excited about the project. So we'll be trucking it over in super sacks or in a massive open truck of some kind, or a giant dump truck of some kind, covered up. But to bring out there and then do a custom malting with him, and then transport it back to the valley. It's totally insane. It's logistically. I mean, I know you up in New York. The Admiral, is it Admiral? No, that's in San Francisco.
Yeah.
The one there's another one in upstate New York that I saw. Castle, is it Castle? Anyway, there was something online about of them. Evan Plan B was talking about them floor malting. The lengths to which craft maltsters are going is so awesome.
Absolutely.
To behold.
And we've talked to plenty of maltsters on the podcast in the past. It's such an interesting and important part of the beer process, and don't know that they necessarily get enough credit as they deserve. How does say 10 or 12 or 14 tons of malt impact your production in a year? Is that going to fully satisfy your kind of base malt needs for a year? Is that more than you need and you'll spread some out, or what is the kind of vision around that?
Yeah, good question. I mean, first of all, we have to have a successful harvest and successful malting, and
there's a lot of things that could go wrong before you get there.
There's so many things. Yeah, and I'm very humble. We're all very humble about the goals. Knowing going into it that there's a high level of risk and we may not get the results that we want first time out, but we believe in the importance of lowering the carbon footprint. I mean, a lot of brewers just click a mouse and get a container or pallets of grain coming from Germany or across the country the next day or 2 days later, and that's awesome. That's the modern world. But I think that we want to stop and consider, if we have the opportunity to consider those impacts. Not everyone, it's not important to everyone, and that's fine. We don't judge anyone for the choices they make in ingredients, and we certainly have clicked the mouse many a time to get ingredients. And
you may still, once you're harvesting and everything, depending on how things go.
Well, I mean, we're realistic about it, but we this is the thing that we have the opportunity to do that here. So it almost feels like a kind of compulsion. Like we have to try this. We have to see if we can make this happen and get a quality base malt for our brewery and maybe for others. So as the capacity is hard to say. We're really small. Yeah. We brewed 180 barrels in the first year. Last year, 380. So we've kind of roughly doubled each year, but we're still under 400 barrels this year with the coronavirus closing us down for 3 months. All on-site consumption done for 3.5 months. So production slowed for sure. But I would think that if we get to our goal. That the 5 acres should be a pretty good match, for a solid year of brewing, or two, with also making some available to home brewers or other commercial brewers who might want to try some of the malt out. Again, assuming that we like where it's at. So, but we haven't talked about growing hops here other than a few like decorative vines, but. The goal, if this works, then the next stage would be to try to convert a couple acres to some hops as well. Then we could really, the dream of doing this vertically integrated farm where we're using our own well water, we're growing our own barley, we've got hops on site, we've got a lot of fruit. We didn't even talk about that, but beyond the plums and bees, there's a lot of other fruit growing here that we use, and the honey. For the yeast and the honey itself, would really close the loop for us on being able to do an estate beer. And I kind of don't love that term, estate beer. It sounds kind of like sort of haughty or something.
A way to charge more money for it.
Yeah, and what people are doing, there's a lot of great projects where people are doubling down, working their butts off to grow their own ingredients. And you've got to respect the hustle when someone is, when they're doing it. I think if it comes from an honest place and someone is doing it with the right intentions, it's a beautiful thing. And so you got, Wheatland Spring is growing their own barley. You've got Bale Breaker up in Washington is growing their own barley and hops now too. I really think that it's the beginning of a lot of these similar projects, and we're so stoked to be just a small part of a wider movement. Again, you kind of need the perfect site for those things to be able to grow together. To have a barley positive climate and hops at the same time, it's very unusual. I think the Willamette Valley is that place. I always have felt that.
Yeah.
So I hope we see more projects, but it's moving in that direction for us, and it's super impractical, but it's inspiring, and we talk about it every day. Are we moving in that direction? What are we doing here to move that forward? And I don't know if people deep down, does the beer consumers really care on a broad level? Probably not. I think brewers know, and maltsters know. And Seth is brewing beer out at his farm now, and you've got the guys that got the Skagit, really serious beer people on the barley growing side. Not just growing a crop and selling it.
I think the question honestly is not, do people know and care about that now? But the question is, will people know and care about that 10 years from now, or 15 or 20 years from now? That, a lot of these things take time to germinate and then blossom, and then even gain consciousness in the broader world of consumers. But if anything is true, it's that the ability of consumers to discern difference, to purchase based on values, as well as flavor and excitement and innovation and everything else, the increasing importance of those things to consumers and their ability to parse out smaller and smaller differences between brewers who are otherwise, in a lot of ways, making a lot of the same thing. That ability to parse those out is increasing and does increase every year. And so, I think it's a lot of investment in, now for something that's not going to pay off immediately, but it may pay off 10 years from now. It takes quite a bit of vision and maybe even sheer stupidity at some level to look that far ahead. I don't mean to insult you on that, but there's a certain stubbornness that it takes to kind of push forward, knowing that this could and should matter at some point in the future, and that you can be there when it does, or also not just be there when it does, but be a force that also helps make it matter.
I would agree. And I think if we've learned a lot of lessons culturally, so many more to be learned, obviously, in the last year. But with the onset of the coronavirus and the kind of, frankly, in the early days of the pandemic, a kind of collapse of local food programs, shipping options, shopping options. What we saw in the Willamette Valley was an incredible flowering of the local and CSA kind of based model, where our friends that run a beautiful dairy down the road called Godspeed Hollow suddenly lines out the door for their raw milk and eggs. And another project down in McMinnville called Mac Market, which is a kind of a beautiful open co-working space with a lot of different suppliers, lines out the door for the CSA and the baked goods and things like that. Because, frankly, there's an erosion of trust in the conventional, large-scale industrial food distribution networks. And, not to get too meta on it, but as a brewery, we also found a very, very sharp increase in traffic here, foot traffic for beers to go at first, which helped us keep the lights on for the first few months. But then upon safely reopening, frankly, we're busier than we have been in the past. We have to manage it much differently than in the past, but it's going very smoothly. And people feel very thankful to have a local brewery. And the fact that ingredients will in the future be coming from a place they can see from their table, I think is rare. And so we're really just proud to be a small part of that movement going on. And I think it's happening. I think it's happening around the country, and where it can take root, it should. It's really exciting. But again, it's only one way of making beer. There's a lot of other beautiful traditions and different ways to make beer, and we certainly draw from a lot of different traditions too. So, but I'm stubborn, and I think my team is stubborn. We all we want to grit our teeth and spit a little bit and kind of get this done. And it has been hard. We've been pushing the rock uphill for years with land use laws locally and with neighbors and people not understanding what we're trying to do, or giving up on it, or just pushing back. And it's really been hard. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. I've loved it.
In your planning for this, what is the cost difference of, say, pushing forward with your own barley growing and malting compared to, say, ordering it in from a larger, barley maltster and concern?
Ooh, oh man, and that's a magic question. I mean, we're in closing. These days, like I said, you can get free shipping on. We can drive up to the warehouse for a massive malt supplier and fill our delivery van with 1,200 pounds of grain in the same day. Those things, for 65 cents a pound for 4 malts of barley from Bavaria. Amazing. But, is it going to cost more? Yeah. It's, without revealing pricing of some of the other craft maltsters we buy from, because I don't know if they would want me to mention it, but anyone can find out what it costs, but it's probably 30% more expensive across the board. However, in breweries, there's so much overhead that isn't your grain cost. In any given batch of beer, grain is significant, but these days, aroma hops as well, coming in at $23 a pound, for Nelson this year. So, if you're paying 90 cents a pound versus 65 cents a pound for us, an 8-barrel batch, it's not that radical of a difference. It would result in a few cents more per glass if we think of it that way. So we're happy to eat that to support local maltsters. And this is not one of those operations, frankly, that runs with the slide rule and the actuary, where the abacus, where we're nope, can't use mecha grade. We're about results. We want to get the best tasting beer in every glass that we can, and sometimes it's maybe not needed, or it doesn't feel like we need to go that direction flavor wise for a certain style, because maybe the hop presence is so high that no one's going to detect whether we have a craft malt behind a lot of dry hops and local hops. So.
Well, Kristen, the way we normally finish up the podcast is the question, what does success look like for you? And I have some ideas about how you may answer that, because I think we've kind of talked about this kind of closing the loop thing. But, in a broader sense, for you, for Wolves and People, what is the end game, and what, is there an end game, and at what point will you know that you have achieved what you want to achieve, and that you have found the success that you had hoped to find?
Oh man, it's like the old story about going to the top of the mountain to find the Buddha, and you get up there, and he's like, "Hey man, where's my beer?" or something. Or I mean, we don't know. We don't know what is to become of this project in some regards. And I used to think that opening day would have been the happiest moment of my life or something, or professional beer career anyway. And it turned out that day was just the beginning of a long, hard road, and it was time to get up the next morning and keep pushing away and keep working. And I think that for us, making a beer where we grow every single ingredient on the farm, except the glass or the can, is going to feel like one of those moments where we can really be proud of what we attempted to do. Can we do a spawn beers in the attic, of this barn and add that into the mix? Yeah, that was always the plan from the start, and we quickly pivoted away from that to release beers sooner, in 3 weeks rather than in 3 years. That was one of those dreams of oh yeah, let's start an all spawn brewery and then release beers in 2017 or 18, and it was back in the early days. So, I think that I really want to build a happy, community inside the brewery, and grow with my team, and make this a place, or continue to be a place where our neighbors and family and friends come and gather here whenever they can, where brewers come and visit, and there's little glimpses of that happiness that come through and that satisfaction on a sunny afternoon where there's 20 people from a winery during harvest, shaking off a hard day with some beers and the sun's going down and it just feels really perfect. And there's days where I'm just brewing and it's quiet in the cellar and, you really, really feel lucky to be doing what you're doing, and anything's possible. So, a full night's sleep is always the best thing you can hope for. Did I mention I have a 2.5-year-old son? Teo, he's the best. He loves running around in the brewery. So, who knows? I'd love to see a lot of other farmhouse breweries open in Oregon and around the country, around the world. I just, for people who are as, have that good fortune to have a site or a spot to do it, and they believe in it enough to be, taking that risk, taking that step forward, then, more power to them. And I remember being out in the Shelton Brothers Festival in New York last year and talking to some celebrated lambic brewery. I won't say which one, but he was telling me they're aggressively moving into barley farming, and I was like, why? I think I know why, but tell me. And he said, well, it's the only way. It's the only way to control quality going forward. And I thought I don't necessarily think it is the only way to make quality beer, right? But I was so struck by his conviction in that moment, and he kind of leveled and looked at me like, this is happening. And it was just another one of those moments when I was like, well, there's some other people out there crazy enough to do this too. So, let's keep trying, and keep expanding the way people talk about beer, adding to the conversation. And not setting rules and setting down, proclamations on what is or what isn't good beer.
Yeah. Well, here's to the crazy ones. Nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Set your compass by RAR North Star Pills. Mountain Rose Herbs offers the highest quality organic herbs, spices, and teas. Grandstand is your source for the latest trends in branded drinkware, apparel, and promotional items. Abe Beverage Equipment offers complete brewing and packaging solutions, and Craft Beer and Brewing's All Access subscriptions are the best way to support this very podcast. Christian, if people want to learn more about Wolves and People, where do they find you?
Yeah, we are online at wolvesandpeople.com, Instagram, Wolves and People, Facebook as well. We have a newsletter you can sign up for, which is rather infrequent, but we do our best to keep people informed. Instagram is pretty solid. We definitely update almost daily on new beers coming out, and reaching out to our community and learning more.
Well, fantastic.
So you can also just come to the brewery or email us directly, and we do our best to stay in touch with people.
It's been really fun to talk to you about your farmhouse authentic approach to. Sorry, I'm not even going to use that word because it's so loaded with other meanings. But I appreciate your thoughtful, intentional approach to brewing beers that are made on your farm from ingredients grown on your farm or cultured on your farm. It's a really cool story, and I hope it's inspirational for people out there. Thanks for talking with me on the podcast, Christian. Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.